All right, well, let's go ahead and continue now talking now about adverbs and pronouns and how we deal with those when it comes to doing these translations. All right. So just to start with an example here, Jay Inslee whispers when he talks. So we're going to notice a couple things about this sentence. First of all, we do have this pronoun here, he, in the sentence. And then also notice that we have the word when as well, and that the word when appears in the middle of the sentence. And so that was on this list of words that needs to move to the middle, or from the middle to the beginning before we translate. And so we want to end up with, when Jay Inslee talks, Jay Inslee whispers. So we're doing two things. We're expanding the pronoun and then moving the word when with it, and whatever followed it went there as well. And it's only when we get it into this form that we want to go ahead and think about, well, what does that turn into in terms of a standard form categorical proposition? So what does the word when mean? It's clearly important here, just like the word if would be. The word when, we might say, means whenever. And so whenever means like any time. And I'm sorry that I'm blurry right now, but anyway, the camera will hopefully refocus here in just a minute. When means whenever. Whenever means any time. Any starts to work into the word all. Hopefully we can understand that. So all times Jay Inslee talks are times Jay Inslee whispers, in other words. Okay. So all times Jay Inslee talks are times Jay Inslee whispers, is what this turns into. That's in standard form. We've got a quantifier all. We've got the subject term times Jay Inslee talks. Got the copula are, and we have the predicate term times Jay Inslee whispers. So that works. But we might notice I didn't use the phrase identical to. And so we might wonder, wait a minute, this sentence does talk about Jay Inslee. He is obviously a unique individual. So why didn't we use the phrase identical to here? And so what you want to focus on is, in this case, let's just say the subject term, right? The subject term is not Jay Inslee himself. The subject term is the times Jay Inslee talks, right? So does Jay Inslee talk more than once? Clearly. So it would be the times Jay Inslee talks. We don't use the word identical there as well. The times Jay Inslee whispers, again, he whispers more than once. So we don't use identical to in that instance either. So again, don't go overboard with the identical to phrase. All right. So you know we're just talking about quantifiers. The quantifiers are all, no, some, just those three. And we have 4 standard form categorical propositions. Some are and some are not. But we need to have our final product, we can say, our translated statement, beginning with all, no, or some. At the same time, we often find sentences that don't have those terms. Certainly, they don't begin with anything like all, no, or some. And so I often find that students can be a little frustrated because after we learn a little bit about how to do these translations, we ask ourselves, well, with a new sentence, right, a new untranslated sentence, one that's not in standard form, how do I start? How do I begin? And I want to emphasize that a very good first step in doing these translations is to simply ask yourself which quantifier you want to use. You know with certainty that the correct answer will begin with the words all, no, or some. And so that right away limits your choices down to 3. And so we'll see how we can put that to use here with a couple of examples. So we might have a sentence that says sport utility vehicles are expensive, right? And we read that, and obviously there's no obvious clue here as to what kind of standard form categorical proposition that will turn into. So we're going to begin by asking ourselves, okay, are we talking about all, no, or some? We know the sentence has to begin with one of those. Well, clearly no is out of the running right away, right? There's nothing negative in here at all. So it's down to all or some. And so when somebody says sport utility vehicles are expensive, I would take them to mean that that's a general statement, right? They might not be correct, right? There might be an inexpensive one out there. But at least their meaning is that in general, sport utility vehicles are expensive. So we would want to go with all as opposed to some, right? And so we end up with All SUVs are expensive, and don't forget, they're not just expensive. They're expensive items, right, or expensive purchases, or expensive vehicles. Some noun there has to be found in the predicate term. So all SUVs are expensive items. But compare it to this one, right? SUVs are sold by this auto dealer. Again, we don't have an obvious clue as to what this is going to turn into. We might think about, well, which quantifier will the sentence begin with? All, no, or some? And again, no seems to be out of the running. There's nothing negative about this. So it's all or some. And so again, we find ourselves asking, the person who's offering this statement, do you think that they mean every single SUV, perhaps, is sold by a particular auto dealer? Well, that seems unlikely. I don't think any auto dealer sells every single kind of SUV. So it's more likely then that the meaning here is that some SUVs are not just sold by this auto dealer, some SUVs are vehicles sold by this auto dealer. So we end up with that. So sometimes to come up with the right translation, you really have to think about the content of the sentence and simply ask yourself, are they more likely talking about all, or some, or perhaps no? All right. Not only do we have unexpressed, or we might say hidden quantifiers or implied quantifiers, we also have what might be considered non-standard quantifiers. So words that sort of function like a quantifier, like all, no, or some, but aren't obviously one of those. And what we're talking about here are words like few, a few, not every, anyone, and what I'll go ahead and describe as the dreaded all are not, right? So we've talked about all or not before, but I do want to just remind you that you want to avoid all or not, and I also will remind you that you will be tempted to write all or not. In fact, probably by the end of this particular lecture. And when you are tempted to write all or not, don't write all or not, obviously, but you want to probably write the words no, whatever the topic might be. We'll come back to that here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and begin with few here. Actually, we're going to begin with a few. Excuse me. I should edit that and reverse those. So we'll begin by talking about a few pens are green, right? So the context you want to imagine here is, imagine there's a table, and on the table there's just a big pile of pens. And you're looking at it and you make the comment, oh, a few pens are green. Now when you do that, right, obviously to your audience, you're drawing their attention to the green pens, getting them to exclusively focus on the green pens here. And so you're saying that they are here, and you want to say, that they are there. And anytime you're talking about something existing, right, that there are these pens there, that's where the quantifier some comes in, right? Because some means there is at least one. And so a few becomes some, and so we get some pens are green, but they're not just green, right? Because then we'd be missing a noun in the predicate term. They are green things, green objects, green writing utensils, if you like. Just, again, choose something fairly generic there for that noun in the predicate term. So a few pens are green is really saying some pens are green things. But we have to be careful here, because a slight change, perhaps just saying few pens are green, can make a big difference. So imagine, again, the big pile of pens on a table, and somebody says, oh, look, few pens are green. Well, if you say few pens are green, you, of course, are drawing the audience's attention to the presence of the green pens there, but then you're also comparing those green pens with the non-green ones that they're apparently mixed in with. So you're actually making two claims here. There are green pens here, and there are non-green pens here. We can handle that then with two sentences. So we would end up saying some pens are green things, right? That's the claim noting the existence of the green pens. And some pens are not green things, because few draws our attention to both sides, so to speak, of this pile of pens. So I know this distinction here is fairly subtle. The only difference really is this presence of the word a here, which means we're going to have one sentence to translate it with, whereas when you don't say a few but just few, you end up with two standard form categorical propositions as the result. So you really have to pay attention to those differences. We also can note here that when we do these translations, we're really just doing our best. In other words, when somebody says few pens are green, they are not simply drawing our attention to the existence of the green pens and the existence of the non-green pens. To say that there are few means you're also pointing out that the green ones have a smaller proportion of the total than the non-green ones. But when we say some are and some are not, as we've done here, we really miss that idea about the different proportions there. But it's the best we can do and still have standard form categorical propositions, and so that's what we do with that. All right. I might also say not every person present is eligible, right? Not every. Well, of course, that's not all, no, or some. But when we say not every person present is eligible, if you heard that, oh, I'm sorry, not every person present is eligible, you're thinking, oh, some people are not. So we end up with some people present are not people who are eligible. Some people present are not eligible people, right, would work as well. So not every becomes some are not. And then finally, and again, remember, I do like to just tease the Mariners fans. Nothing meant by this, right? But if I say anyone who is a fan of the Mariners will be disappointed, when I say anyone, I'm saying any person, right? Any meaning essentially all. And so anyone becomes all people. All people who are fans of the Mariners are people who will be disappointed, is how that one would play out, right? So I just want to make this comment, and then we'll turn to something else. But you have to pay very close attention to these small details, a few versus few, etc. And I think it's very helpful, whether you use these examples or the ones from the book, to have a model, right? So that when you have on the exam, you're faced with a sentence that says few, you know, oh, I've got to come up with two sentences versus a few. So have model examples on your note sheet when you come to the exam on this material.